Good evening, everybody. Before we get started this evening, as usual, I want to ask you to click the like and subscribe button down there. That way it does help us out. That way it'll notify you every week when we put out a new video. And sometimes we put out short videos midweek. Tonight, we're going to start in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 11, verses 16 through 17. Take heed to yourselves, that your heart be not deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and he shut up the heaven, that there be no rain, and that the land yield not her fruit, unless ye perish quickly from off the good land which the Lord giveth you. And 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. 2 Timothy 3:13. But evil, now this is not talking about an essential character of evil like Satan. This is a different word. But evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. And then James chapter 1, verse 22. But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. And then Matthew 13:22, if you read about that in the parable of the soils, it warns us against the deceitfulness of riches. So we're looking at deceit and deceiving. Now, for the past 2 weeks, we took a little sidetrack looking at the technology of the angels. For the past several months, we've been looking at many things that the fallen angels did, and we looked at the possibility that the same effects may be reproduced using technology. For all we know, they used technology at that time. The Bible tells us they traded technology for the ability to do these things. Well, they did trade technology for the hands of the daughters of men in marriage. Honestly, I like pushing a button and having the heat or the air conditioning come on, but what was the cost to mankind of all that technology? And we've been looking at Baal in particular, the deceiver, by whatever name. Just like all the gods, they went by different names in different cultures. And with that in mind, the Bible spends a lot of space warning against deception, some of which is self deception. Deception has to do with being deluded or being beguiled. And this is not simply the use of false impression, but of actually being led astray. And Paul, in the passage we looked at in 2 Thessalonians, he doesn't limit this warning to speaking and writing, but to tricks of any sort. Now, in the 2 Timothy passage, we're warned that evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse. Wax worse and worse means, the way we would say it in modern English, is they would go from bad to worse. A seducer is an imposter or a deceiver. They're professionals at it. They're good at it. They know all the tricks in the world to deceive you. And the word evil in this instance is from the word for evil that doesn't mean evil in character, but it means that there's somebody who is oppressive. Satan is evil in character, but this word has to do with oppressing others through rules, laws, and the destruction of liberty. Now, this is why politics and religion cannot be separated, and the idea that they should be separated is either wrong or is actually demonic. Now, you can be oppressed in many different ways. You can be deceived in many different ways. And while much of this comes from without the church, many believers within the church are themselves deceived into thinking that this is okay. And they will even go so far as to extend that oppression and deception within the church. Sometimes they do it for good reasons. They use false logic to come up with these good reasons. Sometimes it just sounds good and they have no discernment. Sometimes they do it for self-gain, such as watering down the message or even teaching a false message that appeals to the flesh in order to fill the pews, which fills the collection plates. Now, not everybody who spreads a lie is a liar. Many people are themselves deceived. If you have reason to believe that someone is telling you something is true and you spread what they say, if what they're telling you is a lie, you have been deceived yourself. That doesn't make you a liar yourself. Now, there are many honest and sincere Christians who spread lies, whether doctrines of men or doctrines of demons, without any kind of ill intention because they themselves have been deceived. So, what is the deceitfulness of riches? Well, the one who hears the Logos rejects the Logos and becomes unfruitful because of the worries of this age and the deceitfulness of riches. Our riches is our wealth, it's our possessions. Now, there's nothing wrong with wealth and possessions, but they are diluting, or they can be diluting. Are they diluting you? Are you being diluted by your riches? Some people think that Christians should be impoverished or they're not truly Christians, but that idea is not in the Bible. For some individuals, that may be true. But Joseph was told to use the time of plenty to prepare for the time of famine. He was told to accumulate goods, wealth, grain. Always be prepared is a motto of the Boy Scouts before they became corrupted. It probably still is their motto, I don't know. But that's a biblical principle. Be prepared. But is that preparation where your heart lies? Do you give credit to your own industriousness, or do you praise God for what you have? Do you praise Him equally when you don't have riches? Riches can seduce you. Now, Baal is a god of prosperity. To the ancient world, he was the god of rain and fertility, which means that he could bring growth to fields and vineyards. That was his appeal to an agrarian society. They were farmers, they grew vineyards, and that's what was important to them. He could bring increase to their crops. He could bring a profit to them. And today, you probably don't care too much about your vineyard or your fields of wheat unless you're a farmer. I have a grapevine that we just planted that I hope to get some grapes from. We have a fig tree that hope to get from some figs from. We have jalapeno plants and other things like that. But my prosperity does not depend upon that. So what could Baal represent in the modern world? Bigger houses, faster cars, more clothes, fancy food? The United States has been blessed with material prosperity. We were once a godly nation. That prosperity is where the risk is, because there's the danger that prosperity can become an idol. Cotton Mather, who was an influential New England Puritan minister, said that religion brought forth prosperity and the daughter destroyed the mother. Actually, he said it in Latin, but this is the English form of it. So, how did prosperity destroy religion? Specifically, how did it destroy Christianity? When the United States turned away from God, we turned to the God of increase and gain. That tendency's always been there, but a national righteousness, imperfect righteousness, obviously, but at least with righteous intent. But national righteousness prevented that idolatry from being dominant. But in the 20th century, the idolatry reigned supreme. In the ancient world, this God ruled over the vineyards and fields, but in the modern world, he rules over the financial realm. And once again, there's nothing inherently wrong with money. The fondness of money is a root of all sorts of evils or all sorts of oppressions, but the money itself is not the problem. In fact, God uses capitalism as an example of something good. But the fondness of money is the problem. What is your relationship to the wealth? Interestingly, the word for root is rhiza, from which we get the English word rhizome, which is an underground stem from which nodes and shoots will grow up out of the ground away from the original plant. Each part of this rhizome is capable of producing a new plant. There is no vice or sin that some people will not perpetrate in order to get more money or more wealth, and that sometimes that fruit will pop up away from the original source. This is a play on words here on this. And the fondness of money, that's the root of all evil, and that root can pop up anywhere. But wealth is not the problem. The source of wealth may be the problem. So with the return of the deceiver into this modern world, there's a new cult of success that took root that was based upon a doctrine of greed and materialism, of avarice. This greed always attracts power because with power, one can have more wealth, kind of like the sewer flies that we talked about previously, clogging up the sewer pipes. They just accumulate, they multiply, they go to where the power is. Did you ever wonder how a politician can enter office as an average person, make a decent income, yet become unbelievably wealthy within just a few years? So those who are behind the powers are unbelievably more wealthy and indirectly even more powerful. The I know we read this verse a few times, but Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the worldly governors, the princes of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness which are in the high places. Wealth and power and the demonic often go hand in hand. Not everybody in power is evil. Not everybody who's wealthy is evil. But we are warned to be aware of them when they are. We need to keep our eyes open, be aware of our surroundings. We're at war with these powers, whether we know it or not. And if you don't know that we're at war, you're going to lose. Revelation chapter 1, verse 8. Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty. God in the flesh is the Almighty. We know that. Have you ever heard the term the almighty dollar? This is an idiom that started out as a way to satirize obsession with material wealth. It was making fun of it, but is no longer satire. This idiom represents the idea that money can solve any problem and that money is all powerful. It has supplanted the idea of God as being the Almighty. The deceiver, the God of wealth, has deceived people into thinking that more wealth will overcome any obstacle. What's their sacrifice to obtain it? Anything and everything. Even if they have to sacrifice their morals and values, or even the lives of others, they will do whatever it takes to obtain it. And this idea of spending more money fixing things is easily proven false. In the United States, we had one of the best education in the systems in the world just a few decades ago. But now, after throwing more and more money at the situation, we're one of the worst education systems. And yet they say, and many people who follow them and believe them and trust them, they say that if only they had a little more money, then they could fix that. Well, what needs to be fixed is the moral condition of this society. Now, the deceiver of the spirit was not just in the halls of business. That spirit reached far beyond that. Americans were driven by pursuit of wealth, and they served it as their master. Before World War II, the world was in the Great Depression. And in the 10 years prior to World War II in the United States, the lowest unemployment rate was 14.3% and reached as high as 24.9%. The Great Depression was triggered by meddling with the severe recession. It was a severe recession which would fix itself eventually, but they tried to fix it. They weren't godly, they weren't righteous. The Great Depression was cured, they call it a cure, by World War II. And most people are deceived into thinking that war improves the economy. The reality is that all war expenditures are destroyed, bombs and tanks and things like that. There's nothing left to show for it. But when millions of people are killed, the unemployment rate plummets, and that fixes the economy because there's no more unemployment when there's no more people. So what President Eisenhower called the military industrial complex, they did get incredibly wealthy, but everyone else did not get wealthy except as a side effect of all the death. It's not a good thing. Most people can see correlation, but they fail to see the causation of this. After the war, the entire nation was obsessed with the pursuit of wealth. And as much of the wealth was controlled by the government, only certain groups could benefit greatly. It wasn't there for the average person. The economy did get better, everybody's situation improved, but certain people, it improved a lot for them. Now, American life was monetized, including inside the church. And we've looked at how they didn't want to replace the worship of Yahweh in ancient Israel with the worship of Baal, but they only wanted to add the worship of Baal to the worship of Yahweh. Local congregations in the United States, they should have been a protection against the return of the deceiver, but instead they joined in. They added the pursuit of material wealth and personal gain to the worship of Yahweh, and we are reaping the rewards of that apostasy. It is a falling away. Now, I don't believe it's the only falling away that's referred to in the end times prophecies, but it's certainly a part of it. Now, the prosperity gospel, by whatever name you want to call it, came to prominence in the United States in the 1950s, shortly after World War II. Now, it didn't originate there. Its origins go back to the blatant worship of the false gods, but the 1950s is where it started becoming prominent in modern history. The health and wealth gospel, the name it and claim it theology, and most popularly, it's called the word of faith movement, or I've heard it called blab it and grab it. This is a movement within the visible church that has many followers and it has many controversies as well. There are many deceivers in that movement. This movement teaches that positive speech, and more importantly, donations to certain ministries will bring one great wealth and health. And both biblically and culturally, there is evidence that this false gospel was taken to China 2,000 years ago, and they were so disillusioned by the results that it set them upon their course of atheism and paganism as a backlash against it that lasted this day. So this doctrine teaches that health and wealth is automatically the right of believers. And ironically, the only thing the Bible promises for faithfulness is persecution. The Bible teaches persecution. They teach that you're going to get great ease and wealth. Now, in modern society, this concept was reintroduced through the New Thought movement. This is not the same as the New Age movement. Neither New Thought or New Age is new, but both are simply a reintroduction of ancient pagan beliefs and practices. However, it's more difficult for a Christian to be deceived by the New Age movement than by the New Thought movement. The New Thought movement is a spiritual movement. And remember, these people are not atheists. They may not believe in the God of the Bible, they may not submit to him, but they're not atheists. They're very spiritual. But this New Thought movement showed up in the United States in the late 1800s, and it was spread to Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, and Australia. Antarctica seems to be the only continent that is immune from this, and I'm not so sure about that. It's probably there too, just not that I could find. But the New Thought movement is not Christian. It's a mixture of Christian ideas along with Eastern philosophies, metaphysical traditions, psychology, and self-help methods all rolled into one. They're not only a religious force, but they're a political force. And this movement is usually ignored in political discussions. It used to be brought up when they were first making their name in the late 1800s, but kind of ignored now. But this movement is centered upon the power of positive thinking. Think about Norman Vincent Peale. And what this thinking does is it teaches that thinking positively will bring about positive outcomes, and thinking negatively will have negative outcomes. It uses the law of attraction as a concept that since like attracts like, that if you will focus on desired outcomes, then those outcomes will automatically be attracted into your life. It also teaches that the mind has the power to heal the body. It ignores prayer, but it says the mind has the power to heal the body. And most important to many, it attracts prosperity. This is pure Baalism, worship of Baal. The Christian elements in this are interpreted in a metaphysical context, and it's compatible with mystical paganism such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and other Eastern philosophies. Now, this is the syncretism that we discussed previously that merges distinctly different beliefs into one unified mystical system. And to those who believe this merged New Thought religion, when Matthew 7:7 says, ask and it will be given to you, they think that's what this means. It means that you can have whatever you want, just as long as you really, really believe it. That's false teaching. They take it completely out of context. Now, this syncretic New Thought religion was founded in the United States by Oral Roberts. He grew up in poverty and he struggled with tuberculosis as a teenager. When he was miraculously healed during a revival meeting, he decided to dedicate his life to Christian ministry. We all know that Satan can duplicate the miracles of God except for creating life, but he can also deceive someone who receives a miracle from God into a false belief system. I've known people who were miraculously healed, so I know that it's possible. But what they do with it makes a difference. God knows the intent of the heart, and we shouldn't question that. But we can witness the results, both positive and negative. Now, Oral Roberts was one of the first ministers to recognize the potential for TV as a way to spread the gospel. Not a bad idea. His programs reached millions of viewers, and he became so influential that he started his own school, which is Oral Roberts University. At the height of his influence, his ministry brought in the equivalent of about $1 billion per year. Back in that day, it was like 110 million, but with inflation, This year, it would be just over $1 billion. This includes TV, church, school, hospitals, etc., things like that. Well, was that legitimate? That's not for me to decide. That's for God to decide. But he was very powerful and very wealthy. Now, while Roberts was one of the first to combine the New Thought ideas with faith healing, the most prominent evangelist of the prosperity gospel was Kenneth Hagin. He founded Kenneth Hagin Ministries to spread his teachings, which emphasize the speaking of words as a way to manifest wealth, health, and other blessings. And he taught that we are not to ask things from God, but that we are to demand things from God. He puts us in the place of being God. These teachings tell people that financial giving to prosperity gospel preachers, of course, is like planting a seed that will yield a harvest of blessing to you. You sow a seed into a ministry, and in turn, God will multiply that seed back to you. It turns the gospel of grace into a business transaction relationship between any individual and God. It's almost like saying, yes, I'd like to buy a pound of salvation along with half a pound of grace, please. How much is that going to cost me? At the time that these ministries were founded and on into the 70s and 80s, TV was the best way to spread this message. There was a deregulation of broadcast TV and expansion of cable TV. Today, we have thousands of channels from which to stream. There is still broadcast TV, of course, and of course, we have social media and formats such as YouTube. The most prominent televangelists were the ones who taught the prosperity gospel. They were popular. Everybody wanted wealth. Most people don't want to work for it, but they want it. So even those who are willing to work for it rarely achieve the financial success that they wish. And I do know people who were brought into the family of God through these televangelists, even though they later realized that they were false teachers. So they obviously did some good. But they had brought Baal into the church. They took him out of the street and brought him into the church. Now, these were two of the first teachers of the prosperity gospel, but many more followed in their footsteps on into the 21st century. You have Joel Osteen, Creflo Dollar, Joyce Meyer, and others like that. And the one thing they all have in common is they ignore what the Bible teaches about wealth and suffering. Jesus emphasizes humility, compassion, and the fact that suffering is normal. In America, we usually miss all that. Now, a friend of mine from Haiti was in the United States raising money for an orphanage and school, and we had a couple of days and we went to see some things around where I live. After the War for Southern Independence, some people call it the Civil War, poverty in Texas was crushing. It's just absolutely devastating to entire communities. Some towns created almshouses in order to provide food and clothing for paupers, but that wasn't enough. It didn't take care of the problem. Private citizens, non-government charities, and local churches, they also provided long-term assistance to the indigent. But the 1869 Texas Constitution in Article 12, Section 28 required counties to construct manual labor poorhouses for the indigent and for people who committed petty offenses. Eventually, 26% of the counties in Texas had built the poor farms. That's 26 counties out of 254, or 26% out of 254. But these were plots of land that the poor could work and provide for themselves. These poor farms, they had a central house that had a communal kitchen where the women would cook while the men would work in the field. There was a school there for the kids. There was a communal oven that they would heat every day for baking bread. They had individual family quarters, and they had quarters for unmarried people. The most notable of these were in Denton, Kaufman, Harris, Travis, Parker, and Fort Bend. Now, most of these had closed by 1935, but some of them have been preserved as museums. So when we were touring one, my friend asked if he was permitted to take a photo. I said, of course you can take a picture of it. It's a museum. Then I got to thinking about it and I said, why are you taking a picture of that? Well, this house for family quarters measures approximately 6 feet by 10 feet. And these had bunks built into the walls. You could have a family of like 6 in there. And he told me that in Haiti, that was not a poor person's home. But here, that is considered inhumane by modern standards. But was it inhumane? Texans had mixed feelings about the poor farms. I've known some people who actually lived in them as a child. They've since passed because these poor farms closed 90 years ago, but I do know some of the people who lived in these as children. These were lifelines for some of the poor people. They had a warm place to live, they had food, and they had the dignity of work. The work ethic is something that we've lost, and with the focus on prosperity, the poor farms were a reminder that not everybody was materially successful. However, many people felt that these poor farms were simply a place to discard social outcasts from neighboring towns. The reality is, they were both. John chapter 12, verse 8. For the poor always you have with you, but me you have not always. Jesus doesn't discredit giving to the poor, but he does present a relativity. Modern society has lost that relativity. They lost it long ago. The poor farms gave dignity of work, but then communities also dumped the deaf, the blind, the elderly, the mentally retarded, and minor criminals in with the poor. And this created a really bad environment for some of the people. And most of the people that were put in there had no way to ever improve their life. The working poor could, but most of them couldn't better themselves. While this was a good intention in providing the dignity of working for themselves, the poor farms failed because the communities failed to treat all human beings with dignity. Now, although in this passage Jesus is speaking of spiritual poverty, what he says also applies to physical poverty. For the poor, work is dignity, but for the wealthy, they want to remove anything that detracts from their perceived wealth. They remove the outcast from their society just as much as the church removes outcasts from their congregations. Only the wealthy belong in society, according to these people, including much of the church. Well, if only you had faith, you wouldn't be poor. John chapter 9, verses 1 through 2. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? These poor farms were used to get rid of outcasts. Margaret Sanger did the same thing, only more permanently. Then the Nazis stepped it up a notch in Germany, killing a lot of people. After all, this was modern science. This is all idolatry. This is the deceiver. This is worship of Baal, increasing wealth at the cost of others. At the time that this was going on, the church stood up to modern science. But in the time since, it has joined modern science in many ways. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, warn those who are disorderly, comfort the feeble-minded, comfort the little-souled, comfort the faint-hearted, support the weak, be patient toward all men. History has shown that when the church is suppressed, poverty increases. Poverty, homeless, and everything else that goes with it. Both physically and spiritually, society is worse off. Now, the Bible is mostly spiritual, but it uses the physical to describe these things. Therefore, the physical is legitimate also. A strong nuclear family, a godly society, and a rule of law are all necessary to a vital and free society, but the church is suppressed. The society itself has become idolatrous. The worship of wealth, which eventually boils down to the worship of self. That's the very root of a demonic society. People try to use government to replace charity. And in no place does the Bible command that we enact laws requiring people to purchase insurance or to use force to take money from one person to give it to another, but it does admonish each and every one of us to do things to ease the burden of the brethren. This is the calling of the church, and we have abdicated that responsibility. When we took God out of the schools, we took God out of the government, took him out of the marketplace, we took him out of public welfare, and out of every other aspect of life, our society started a long spiral from which we've not yet hit bottom. That is how we got to where we are today. We added the worship of Baal and Astarte into the worship of Yahweh, and we're being consumed. The prosperity gospel is the natural result of this society. In 2005, John Piper told a group of more than 1,000 college students what he felt towards the prosperity gospel. He said hatred. How do you detect the prosperity gospel? Sometimes it's blatant and it's easy to tell, but sometimes it's more subtle. Since I just mentioned John Piper, I'm going to use him again. He laid out 6 keys to expose the prosperity gospel. You'll find no serious doctrine of the Bible, necessity, and normalcy of suffering. You'll have an absence of a clear and prominent doctrine of self-denial. You'll have an absence of a serious exposition of scriptures. You'll have a failure to deal with tensions in scriptures. You'll have church leaders who have exorbitant lifestyles. And you'll have a prominence of self-esteem, and a marginalization of the greatness of God. Now, most of these things are relative, but they're present even in most churches. In a 2023 study, which is linked below, 52% of American Protestant churchgoers say their churches teach that God will bless them if they give more money to their church. And 24% of them strongly agree with that teaching. Now, God will bless you if you're faithful, both with your money and with your life. But this is not a one-size-fits-all category that you give it to me and you'll be blessed. In 2017, only 38% of churches were taught this. It's up that much just in 5 years. 6 years. I can't do math. 76% of churchgoers believe that God wants them to prosper financially, and in 2017, it was only 69%. Most of these people think that they have to do something for God in order for Him to bless them. But those blessings always seem to be financial. They're transactional. This is Baal worship, and it's in our churches. The basic ideas of the prosperity gospel are that you are to give in order to gain material compensation from God. The atonement of Jesus on the cross extends to the sin of material poverty. Faith is a tool that you generate yourself in order to receive prosperity, and prayer is a tool to force God to give you stuff. He is apparently like a wish machine there to grant you every command. There are other problems with this false gospel. These are not all of them. This is the basic gist of things. And these people may honestly think that they're teaching the Bible. I don't know their hearts, but their fruits can be seen. They have made grace obsolete in their lives. So what is the source of our national idolatry? Psychology is often maligned because it's used as a tool that does much damage. However, it's a tool. It's just simply a tool. That's all it is. You can use a screwdriver to screw or unscrew a screw, or you can stab somebody with it. The problem is not the tool. The problem is the one who uses that tool. In our modern culture, there are many people who are mentally ill. There are many people who are demonized, but some are simply mentally ill, or it can be a combination of the two. But for those who are mentally ill, they will often seek help from professionals. Well, our structure of caring for mental health can be used as a tool through psychology. And there are many who are usually on the modern political left who use it as a tool of control. They'll ask, well, what seems to be the problem? Then you tell them the problem, then they will encourage you to embrace that and don't change a thing and just love yourself the way you are. And you should love yourself. You can't love your neighbor as yourself if you don't love yourself. But there are others, usually on the political right, who use the tool for a cure. You need to love yourself, and to do that, you need to improve yourself and fix your problems. Thomas Aquinas is the first really modern behavioral scientist. Most people read his work for its religious parts, which is good to read, but it doesn't hurt to read it for the behavioral parts. The modern secular world separates the spiritual from the physical, behavioral in this instance. And as believers, we know, or we should know, that the physical is inseparable from the spiritual. Idolatry will destroy the individual as well as the society. It works great to start out with, but it will destroy you. On a personal level, Aquinas points out that you're going to chase idols, and there will ultimately be one that attracts you more than any other. And you must recognize this if you're going to fix the problem. But you need to fix the problem. When you chase idols, you're going to do things that you will regret later in life. And that's what's important. This is behavior, and that is what makes those things idols. Those things will call to you with a robust voice that you will learn is a false voice later. When we read great works of literature, both the Bible and secular works, we know that when people chase idols, they may get what they want in the immediate future, but in the end, they ultimately fail in getting what they want. They get a lot of regret, but they don't get anything positive generally. If you want to discover your greatest idol, you must identify the ones that are not truly your idol. In other words, you take the things that may cause your problems. Well, this is not a problem. This is not a problem. When you get rid of the things that are not a problem, what you have left, that's the problem. And the things that you want are going to most generally fall into four categories: money, power, pleasure, and honor. And this is honor in the narcissistic sense, not like serving with honor, but it has to do with receiving fame or prestige. True honor, like first place, or false honor, like a participation trophy. So look at the list of false teachers that we just mentioned. If you read about their lives, you can find what eventually brought about their downfalls. For that matter, you can take honorable, God-fearing preachers and teachers who brought about their downfall through a crack in their armor through which an idol can get a foothold. It's not just the false teachers that fall. But out of these four things, money, power, pleasure, and honor, which would you eliminate? Now, this doesn't mean you have to eliminate these things entirely, but you have to eliminate it down to where you only have a normal amount compared to those around you. For example, if you got rid of money, it doesn't mean that you'd be poor, but that you would have exactly what everybody else around you has. So money, power, pleasure, honor, which ones do you kick away? You may say, I don't need so much money, so money, or I don't really care about what anyone thinks, so I can get rid of honor, or I don't want to tell other people what to do, so I'll get rid of power, or I'm not hedonistic, so I'm going to get rid of pleasure. When you look at these things, think not only of yourself, but think of how they apply to society in general. You may not need much. You might be fine with packing everything in a suitcase and living out of your car. But what about the rest of society? It used to be they wanted to give everybody a chicken in every pot, but now it's a porterhouse steak on every plate, 4 cars in the garage, and every luxury you can imagine. And there's nothing wrong with things. But how important are things in your heart? Is a 60 square foot house sufficient, or is that inhumane? Our entire society is based upon a house of cards of debt in which we create money out of thin air, and we keep spending and spending and enslaving our future generations to more debt. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. There's nothing wrong with money, but you need to be aware of your financial situation and be aware in your heart. But you can only get so many nice things with money, then it gets kind of boring. However, having money does open up possibilities that you wouldn't have without money. It can also open up many things that will bring unhappiness. With money, you can pay for medical care, you can have transportation, food, clothing, shelter, you can help missionaries, you can buy a book, you see a sporting event with your son, you can go to the zoo. However, you can become obsessed with money or with things. And sometimes things that can be a blessing in one instance can be a curse in another. For example, somebody who is very wealthy and travels all the time to all these exotic destinations, they cease to wonder at new sights because they've seen them all. And those things should bring joy to somebody who rarely gets to travel. Maybe you don't need honor more than the next person. Honor is something that should be earned. Sometimes we do the wrong thing and we find dishonor, and that's never fun. But maybe we have no need to be the star on the marquee, but our society demands honor no matter our choices. Our society will take someone who has a history of making bad choices, and they will call them brave. They will call them a hero for making bad choices and without demanding any kind of change. And the attitude is, you better respect me or else. Here in Texas, recently, an athlete was stabbed to death for being in the wrong seat. The assailant was disrespected. And sadly, a representative from Texas said that he had the right to do that. 1 Peter 2:17 says, honor all. Love the brotherhood. That's the family of believers. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the king. We have a participation trophy world instead of one that's based on merit. And the end result is that no one is honored. We all feel honored, but nobody is honored. So we demand false honor and we punish those who fail to give it. Uh, you have a kid. I have a friend of mine, his son, whenever he was growing up, when he would play any kind of sport, they would get a trophy. No matter they could come in last place, they'd get a trophy. And oh, he loved that trophy. As an adult, he realized that when everybody got one, it was worthless. But our society demands honor for everybody, no matter what. How about pleasure? There's certainly nothing wrong with pleasure. God wants us to have pleasure, but just as with wealth, it can become a curse. Pleasure can easily become hedonistic. Marriage, for example, is a God given institution in which husbands and wives are to have pleasure in one another. But we're not to have pleasure in other people's husbands and wives or every random person on the street or the boyfriend or the girlfriend of the week. We can enjoy a nice meal, or we can be gluttons. We can enjoy the fruit of the vine, or we can be drunkards. We can take pride in the work that we can do, or we can be prideful of the work that we do. There's a little play on words there on that. But we can take pleasure and rest, or we can be slothful. But the last on this list is power. This is the one that seems to be the problem with society. With power comes wealth, honor, and pleasure for a season. Most people don't want to have power over others because they don't want to have power over themselves. This is not the same thing as having authority over others. I mean, there's certain authorities that are right, but this is power. I recently made a joke about when I visited Boston that I had to leave because nothing could live there. And I was using it as a play on words because obviously people live there, but do they truly live? They have restrictive rules for every aspect of life. Just people piling on top of each other. Some people like that. But a bystander to this conversation got angry and made a comment that without them telling others what to do, there would be lawlessness. And he obviously missed the point of liberty. But this attitude is prevalent in our culture and it's getting worse. There's a book, it's older, but all the examples are accurate. This book's called, I can't remember the name of the book, it's a red book. But it chronicles the rules of things, such as OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Association, which has created rules that have cost businesses billions of dollars, but it's not increased safety or health at all. Or government regulations that make changing a doorknob in a school in New York City cost $176,000 instead of simply changing a doorknob. Just rules and regulations, not a special doorknob. Or our Department of Education, which has added untold billions to the cost of education, all while taking the United States from the top of the world in education to the bottom. It's all about control, and they always target the children. One of the problems is that people who either like or want power are not bothered when people have power over them because it feels legitimate. They want to be in that position themselves one day. Totalitarians are comfortable when they're in a totalitarian system because they want to be the totalitarian. Dictators admire dictators. Being rational people, we think that everyone in a totalitarian system wants to be free except for the goon at the top. But if you look at these systems, it is goons all the way down. You have a goon at the top and a goon under him and a goon under him all the way down. Just layers and layers of little dictators over their own realms until finally it comes down to self. The individual is the smallest minority, and you can oppress yourself. Now, you can look at these different areas money, power, pleasure, and honor, and you can fix yourself through prayer and righteous living. Not perfect righteousness, but like King David, you can be after God's own heart. You may fail, and it may be painful, but you can work on it. Or you can accept your failures and embrace them. However, as a society, there is no effort to fix the problems, there's no acknowledgement of the problems, and a full embracement of the problems. Baalism will give you all of these things. You only need to sacrifice everything. 2 Peter 2:19. While they promise them liberty, and this word for liberty here is license, but while they promise them license, they themselves are the servants of corruption. For of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he brought into bondage. He is enslaved. The world demands that we separate politics from Christianity, But religion is what will open the door for the deceiver, or it's already opened the door. It will embolden him, and he will dominate and enslave everyone, either voluntarily or through force. The Bible demands that we involve ourselves. While we're not of the world, we are in the world, and we have obligations to help others. Politics is a mission field in which Satan tries to shut down all political, religious, and economic freedom. Those who wrote the United States Constitution, they were aware of this and they knew what they were doing. However, at the same time, there were those who were opposed to liberty. They agreed in word until they could corrupt things over the years and turn us away from liberty. The same thing has happened within the church. The church leaders have corrupted what the Bible says, and they've deceived many. They welcomed Baalism into the church. There was no need to put the brakes on righteousness and do an about face. They don't have to completely stop you and turn you backwards. They only have to make you slightly divergent from the truth. They'll just get you to go to one side to steer you in the wrong direction. And it is the direction and not the intention that determines your destination. And modern preachers and teachers are leading people straight down the road to hell.
Okay.
This is not New Age. This is New Thought. We will look at New Age in the future. It's dangerous, but it's easier to spot for the diligent student. L.L. White once said, "It has long been held that whoever denies the transcendent God asserts his own divinity. In dropping God, man recovers himself. It is time that God be put in his place, that is in man, and no nonsense about it." This should be a warning to us, but these people, they treat this like it's a good thing. They treat it as if we're supposed to be the gods. We know better. This is the doctrine of the deceiver. This belief is at the root of all false beliefs. Man thinks that we can control and create everything, and there is no God to which we must answer. But man will turn to a false God that starts out as a God of self, but will become something far more destructive. Mankind will reject the one true God and will accept a false God. And we're in for a rough ride. Close out tonight. I want us to read Matthew chapter 24, verses 4 through 8. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation, this is ethnos, people groups, for people groups shall rise up in arms against other people groups, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. Brothers and sisters, we're there right now. Have a grace day.